Hey everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we will be discussing on how we can make use of VPC endpoint to connect to the SQS service privately. Now the AWS allows customers to access the SQS service using the VPC endpoint. So now if you want to access it, you do not really need a public IP or you do not really need your packets to traverse the public internet. So the architecture is very simple. You have a EC2 instance. Through the interface endpoint, you can connect to the SQS service privately. Now, one of the questions that really comes is, hey, Zeal, I have understood the interface endpoint and I know interface endpoint supports a lot of services. Then why are we covering SQS service only? Or for example, why are we not covering other interface endpoint supported services? For example, whenever you go ahead and create an endpoint, you see that there are many supported services that are available over here. You have ACM, you have AppStream, you have Athena, Audit Manager, CloudTrail, Cloud HSM, and so many others. Why are we specifically covering the SQS service only? And the answer is from the exam point of view. Whichever services are generally focused on, we make sure that our course is tuned on that. So let's look into the SQS endpoint related data. Now I already have a SQS based interface endpoint that is created. So this is the endpoint and the endpoint type is interface and the service name you see, it is SQS over here. Now for today's demo, before we discuss about some of the important pointers related to this service, I have a EC2 instance and I also have a SQS queue. And what we will be doing from the EC2 instance, we will be sending a message to the SQS queue using our interface endpoint. Now for today's demo, I already have a sample command that is available. Let's look into what it is. So you have AWS SQS. We are sending a message. We are sending a message to a US East 1 region. The message body is hello from SQS endpoint over here. And we are also specifying a queue URL. So queue URL, you can directly get it from here. So whenever you have a SQS queue created, you have a queue URL here. And then you also have a endpoint URL. So this is the additional thing that we are adding here and we'll be discussing on what this is. So once I go ahead and I'll press enter, I'll basically get the message ID, and within the SQS queue, basically if I refresh, you should see you have one message available. And if we'll quickly receive a message, let's do a poll for messages. Let's open this message and we are getting hello from SQS endpoint. Now one of the question that comes is, how do you really know if this message went through a public internet or it went through an interface endpoint? Now there are multiple ways to find it out. First way is you can look into the TCP dump and verify if the message is going to the private IP. Second quick way is you can go ahead and reference to the security group. So this interface endpoint has a default security group associated with it. Now, if we go ahead and remove a rule in this default security group, let me quickly show you. So currently this security group has all traffic allowed from 172.31.00.16, which is the IP address of our EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and delete this rule. Let's do a save. And now let's go ahead and try to run this command once more. And you see, you're not really getting any output here, primarily because the security group associated with our interface endpoint is not really allowing this communication to happen. So from this, we can quickly identify that the message is going through an interface endpoint. Great. So now let's go ahead and quickly discuss some of the important pointers related to the interface endpoint for SQS. The first pointer is that you can use VPC only with the HTTPS SQS endpoint. So this is one thing that needs to be noted. Second is, when you configure SQS to send messages from VPC, you must enable private DNS and specify endpoint in the format of SQS followed by the region followed by AmazonAWS.com. We'll be discussing this second point in just a moment. And the third important point that you need to note is that the private DNS doesn't support legacy endpoints such as q.amazonaws.com. So this is also one of the ways, or I would say legacy way to connect to the SQS. However, if you're making use of a private DNS, then such legacy endpoints are not supported over here. Now in the second point, we were discussing about the private DNS configuration. Let me quickly show you. So generally within the interface endpoint, let's go to details. And within here, you see you have a private DNS, which is SQS useast1.amazonaws.com. And this is what we had specified here, which is SQS useast1.amazonaws.com. And similar to the first point where it states you can use VPC only with the HTTPS SQS endpoints. And this is the reason why we also have HTTPS that is available in the endpoint URL. Now do note that once you understand the basics of interface endpoints, irrespective of what other services that you make use of, the overall configuration will be very similar. However, the difference would be in the important pointers over here. So there are some important pointers that you might get quizzed on during the certification process, and this is one of the reasons why we look into it in a little more detail. So with this, we'll conclude today's video.